I'm listening to Question Time, and Jacob Rees-Mogg is about to speak, and I think we should listen to him. I find it very. So he's talking about Keir Starmer and about the net migration figures.
June 23, they were not far short of 1 million.
And Keir Starmer's claim that the past government was operating an open borders policy despite its rhetoric.
That government, were you running an open borders experiment?
No, there was not an open borders experiment, but immigration policy failed. And it failed very badly, and it failed to do what the British people had wanted.
So when Robert Jenrick, who is now Shadow Justice Secretary and was a former immigration minister, said today is a day of shame for the Conservative Party, the public are right to be furious. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree with him, and as a Conservative, let me apologise to people. We failed, and we were culpable for that because we were in charge. There are all sorts of reasons why we failed.
So what went wrong?
What went wrong? Partly it was a response to COVID, and there was a feeling that it was going to be very hard to find people to fill jobs. Partly it was the way that economic growth was scored by the ABR, and it was thought that migration would boost growth and would allow the tax revenues to rise and to pay for public services that people want. Partly a new system was being brought in which allowed too many people to come in.
Post-Brexit?
Well, it was a post-Brexit system. We had control. The terrible thing is that we had control. We do now have control of our numbers.
So what do
and
you
we
think,
let far too many people in?
As someone who was a strong proponent of Brexit, that the figures for net migration were lower pre-Brexit than post-Brexit?
Well, hold on. They were completely wrong pre-Brexit. So,
are you disputing that they were lower?
Well, the figures, let me just explain. The pre-Brexit figures, it was thought that about 2 million people would register as a right to stay here post-Brexit. The figure was over 5 million when it was finally created. So for years, the ONS was giving us wrong figures on the people coming from the European Union. So yes, I do dispute that they were low beforehand because they were simply wrong. There were an extra 3 million plus people who had come in who no one was recording. So we then introduced a system that initially, of course, we had COVID, so small numbers came in. Immediately after COVID, there was this economic concern about destruction of labour in the domestic market, and it simply got wildly out of control. Rishi Sunak, to his credit, began to tighten it up at the end of his period, but nothing like enough. We now have the ability, and I hope the Labour government will do this, to bring immigration down to the under hundreds of thousands a year, below 100,000 itself.
Lisa, as a government representative on the panel?
I think we'll stop there for a moment because it's very interesting to hear Jacob Rees-Mogg apologising first of all. He's no stranger to articulating controversial positions with polished precision, both acknowledging significant failures in managing migration and rejecting Labour's claim about an open borders experiment. This dichotomy, the admission of failure while denying ideological culpability, forms the crux of his response. He denies the culpability partly because he says the system of recording immigration was wrong before COVID, and that a much larger group before Brexit, much larger groups of people were coming to the UK from the EU than were properly being recorded. Rees-Mogg's uncharacteristic apology strikes a rare tone of humility in British politics. As a Conservative, let me apologise to people. We failed and we were culpable for that because we were in charge. A direct concession underlines the gravity of the issue, net migration surpassing 900,000 in 2023, a figure that undermines years of Conservative rhetoric about controlling borders. But the fact is, we don't have enough people to staff the NHS. And stopping people coming into the UK isn't sorting out the NHS. We have too many people in the bureaucratic areas of the NHS and not enough people actually in the front line. We are desperate for foreign students to come to the UK to bolster our flagging universities. And yet we've still got all this rhetoric coming out of the present government not dissimilar to the previous government. So Jacob's acknowledgement of failure and the defensive retort, there was not an open borders experiment. Migration policy failed very badly. Here Rees-Mogg attempts to disentangle the intent behind immigration policies from the outcome, and his framing implicitly pushes back against the Labour leader Keir Starmer's accusation that the Conservatives deliberately liberalised immigration to serve a post-Brexit economic agendum. And Rees-Mogg contextualises these policy failures within pandemic-era pragmatism, saying it was partly a response to COVID and there was a feeling it would be hard to find people to fill jobs. And while this justification might resonate with some, it raises critical questions about whether the government underestimated the long-term impact of such measures. His admission that the Office for Budget Responsibility influenced migration decisions to boost growth and allow tax revenues to rise suggests economic expediency took precedence over delivering on promises of reduced migration. Arguably the most striking aspect of Rees-Mogg's remarks was his lamentation that post-Brexit Britain had control of our numbers yet still allowed excessive migration. This paradox, achieving sovereignty but squandering its potential, is emblematic of broader post-Brexit disillusion. He describes his failure as a terrible thing, exposing the internal consistencies within the Conservative narrative. And when Fiona Bruce challenged him on the apparent irony of higher migration figures post-Brexit, Rees-Mogg shifts the focus to flawed pre-Brexit data collection. He argues that the ONS had grossly underestimated EU migration numbers, claiming the figure was over 5 million when it was finally created. So by contesting historical statistics, Rees-Mogg tries to undermine the comparison entirely, though this tactic risks appearing evasive rather than explanatory. Starmer's scathing critique of the Conservative record paints a starkly different picture. Policies were reformed deliberately to liberalise immigration. Brexit was used for that purpose, to turn Britain into a one-nation experiment in open borders. And Rees-Mogg's rejection of this framing, while forceful, lacks the specificity to entirely dismantle Starmer's claims, and the Labour leader's assertion that this was failure by design cuts to the heart of the Conservative contradiction. Campaigning on promises to reduce immigration while implementing policies that facilitated its rise. For a former Brexit opportunities minister, Rees-Mogg's candid critique is both a reflection of his diminished political standing and an attempt to salvage ideological integrity. By apologising and accepting blame, he distances himself from current leadership efforts while reaffirming his commitment to Conservative principles. However, his inability to address fully Starmer's accusations or propose credible remedies leaves the audience questioning whether this is mere damage control or whether he's simply there to promote his reality TV appearance. Rees-Mogg's intervention is a reminder of how deeply immigration remains a political fault line. And while his apology may win posts for honesty, it underscores the gap between Conservative promises and outcomes. Meanwhile, Labour's accusations of deliberate liberalisation amplify the debate, framing the issue not merely as one of incompetence but of ideological betrayal. This exchange between Rees-Mogg and Starmer is less about migration itself and more about the battle to shape public perception of the post-Brexit landscape, a landscape where control remains an elusive deal. And actually, we have to ask whether or not we, in fact, need more immigration to fill the jobs which are vacant. And if we're happy to have those jobs vacant and more jobs vacant because we're reducing immigration, how do we manage our economy? How do we manage to make our businesses work? I don't see that that's possible if we put the ideology absolutely into action. We're just grinding ourselves to a halt for the sake of what? Rhetoric?